Bismillah Rahman Rahim. Dear students, the current session is about the expansion of vocabulary with particular focus on loan words. I hope and expect by the end of the session you would have an overall view of the loan words as we find them in English language, and specifically you would be able to understand how through the times from the early middle to modern and till now, the additions are made in English language through borrowing. Well, my dear students, the expansion of vocabulary seems to be going on at a very great speed, at a very high speed in today's world where English is used. However, this is not something new. The expansion of vocabulary takes place in every language, and as far as English is concerned, it has always been happening. When we come to the sources through which this expansion happens, the main source, the major source that we trace is of borrowing. Again, borrowing is not something, the process of borrowing is not something new in English language. From the very old times, if we trace the history, we would realize the English language has a history of taking loan words from other languages, such as Greek and Latin languages, to expand the vocabulary and to meet the needs of the times. If we trace the history, we would realize in English, mainly loan words come from Latin language. There are other sources like Greek and French languages, and then through the early modern period, we would see a number of words were borrowed from other languages. As English started expanding, with its expansion came the influences of other languages. Wherever the English people traveled, they brought words from there. From wheresoever in the world people came to England, they brought their own influences. So, a lot of languages were lending words to English. The next source after Latin language that we need to consider as a language from where words were borrowed is French language. Well, the French loans include military words such as bayonet and words from the life sciences such as anatomy or muscle. And there are long lists of these words that we can find. However, apart from specific domains of life, general words were also added into, the general domain of life as well. These words include docility, entrance, and invite. There were a few words from classic Greek, though most of these came through, the channel of Latin or French language. Greek also contributed, but sometimes, rather I would say most of the times in the case of Greek language, the contributions that were made were not direct. They came through the channels of either Latin language or French. They tended to be learned words, and many of them are technical terms of literary criticism, rhetoric, and theology, because these were the areas where aspiration and inspiration was taken from Latin and Greek, classic works. So words which were, brought into English at different time points in the history, they were probably directly borrowed from Greek. They included anathema, cosmos, larynx, pathos, etc. Overall, if we look at the history of English language with particular focus on the development of vocabulary and its expansion through different sources, what we understand is that English language has always borrowed through the history. The process of borrowing has been done through various sources, through coining, new words, by taking some roots sometimes from Greek or Latin languages, or for that matter from French language as well. But, loan words, the words that would be taken from these languages, from the history, we find the examples had been always a great source of, expanding the vocabulary of English language. The important point that I'd like to make about, these loan words is that even in the modern times, in the 19th and the 20th century, what you would notice is that a lot of new vocabulary, in fact, most of, the words in the field of science, they were created, they were added in the 19th and 20th century. Many of them were loan words, and still loan words are taken in the modern times from Greek and Latin languages. Though, languages like French and German and Spanish and, Indian for that matter, and Pakistani and, all the South Asian languages, African languages, in the modern times, they have contributed words towards the expansion of the vocabulary of English language.